Welcome to Discovering Creativity. And I was going to ask you, John, what is your definition of creativity after so many years working in this area?
Okay, in the past, my definition of creativity is all about seeking new ideas and alternatives that eventually results in a unique solution to a problem. Mm-hmm. But over a period of time, I realized people use the word like, creativity is all about creating compelling, unexpected, unique solutions. But it was sometime in 2006, I actually visited Austin and attended the American Creativity Association conference.
Yes.
And at that point of time, I realized that creativity is more than what I thought of. The element of play and the spontaneous play element was introduced in those, especially the activities that is held outside the classroom, in open space. And I forget his name. I think the gentleman was from Broken Crayons,
Alan Black.
So I attended the session. I thought, wow, this guy is amazing. And the way he introduced the concept was more fun. And today I look at creativity as something is no longer an exclusive concept confined to a group of individuals, but it can be simply as something that is, we do something, an idea that is different and that add value. And that's it. It's not necessarily to be radically unique or outstanding or compelling. It's just a slight change, and that's what it is. Now, I find this definition helps me in dealing with participants because the moment they understand that, hey, it is just all about making small change, and people say, let's go for it. So that's how I look at it. So at the end of the day, for me, is we all have the power to be creative, and it's all about thinking something different from what we do, from the norm, and make a change, and it gives results to something different. Now, so that is how I look at creativity.
Well, that's a very, very insightful comment because if people tend to be very judgmental about their own creative ideas, the moment you say a small change, it becomes easier for them.
Yes. So one of the things that I realized is basically, of course, creativity can be very radical, very groundbreaking kind of ideas, but it also can be incremental. So when in a corporate environment where I work with, I realized my approach makes people feel comfortable. You say, hey, I'm not Steve Jobs, but I still can make a difference because it's all about incremental changes with ideas, that slight tweak, and I get something, and then I say, I consider that we are creative. So that's how I look at it.
Thank you. Yeah, it makes sense. So what do you think are the foundations of your success as a business, training people how to be creative in Singapore?
Okay, to me, is basically the way I look at it is this. I keep the definition of creativity very simple. So when I do basically business training for people to become more creative, I use the definition I shared with earlier on. And I basically convince people that everyone can be creative and it's a skill that we can learn. And I use play in the process of introducing business training and creativity, and that is an important part for me. So you find that at the end of the day, when play is introduced right from the beginning, in fact, my approach actor is basically when I go in and run a program, I start with the play. Instead of talking about a topic or objective or any of those things, we introduce an element of play, and then we basically engage in activity, and now you say, hey, what does that mean to you? So at that point of time, you find that play approach has been successful for me, and it basically people say, hey, this is a little different. I also don't use too many slides, so it's all about play and then debrief and then sharing and questions and so on, and that's how we basically deal with those things. Okay, so to me, is at the end of the day, I basically follow the John Dewey's approach, learning through doing. Okay, so that's how it is. So that is my approach that basically consider creative training to be successful with people.
Yeah, well, thanks. And how has this approach changed over the years? Is there anything that you have encountered when this apart from the play and the doing? Is there anything else that you have encountered that is very successful over the years of conducting workshops?
Okay, now one of the things that basically after coming to the ACA conference in Austin in 2006, and then twice I went for SIPSI, and I come across another approach in what we call, you would have heard about it, Lego Serious Play methodology.
Yes.
It started off by two gentlemen from the Lego Foundation, Robert Rasmussen and Per. And when they were in Lego, and then subsequently they come out of it and they train people. And I introduced the Lego bricks into my training, and that basically is one way that I have changed over a period of time the way I run my workshop. One other thing that I have made some changes that basically that made the way I conduct my workshop is introducing the elements from that Otto Scharmer's from Presidency Institute in MIT on the so-called matrix of educational evolution. He basically says that in today's context, we must be more not only learn and student centric, but we must be co-creation and innovation centric. So I engage people and I give them opportunity to explore and experience, and then we basically discuss about it together. So these are the two changes I made. One is the Lego Serious Play approach in most of the program I run, and the other one is the learning and centric along with co-creation. So that means they engage, and then at the end of the day, they look at it and they say, "Oh, yes, now I know about it." It's like what some people call it in the education system which are involved is it's not about schooling, it's about learning. The school's not about schooling, but it's more of a place for learning, and that approach is what I adopted.
Okay.
So I use a lot of hands-on activities. I use cards, I use games, and so that's the approach that I adopted in the last 5-6 years in order to make a little different the way people learn and the way that I conduct the sessions.
What do you think could be the main barriers hindering people from becoming more creative?
Okay, now in fact, sometime, especially there is a program we run for a healthcare institution in Singapore for quite some time where the doctors, nurses, and other people attend, and we always talk about it. What holds you back?
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is basically we design a playing cards with about 52 different kind of barriers that normally is highlighted by research findings, and we give about each person is about 6 cards, and I say look at it, and then what do you think 2 common barriers that you face in being creative or practicing creativity in your workplace? And then they basically individually they choose 2 cards, and then a small group of 4 people, I say, share among yourselves what is happening here. And now that the 4 of you have 8 different cards probably, and if you were to narrow it down to no more than 2 cards, what will that be? So in the process of doing all this, you realize there is few things that basically comes out very often, and that is basically is when people feel the biggest barrier when people feel it's too risky, we can't afford to be wrong, and the fear of failure is one of the major frequently mentioned reasons for not being so creative. And the other thing is very interesting is basically the way we do things are different, and they stuck with that mindset. And somebody basically picked up a card and they had a very interesting discussion. He says the preferences for toxic nostalgia, they live in the past. We have done this for 100 years, we have done this for 50 years, and that nostalgia feeling is one of the biggest barriers. Okay? Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, of course, people wanted to have this been tried before? Has this been tested? Has it been proven? Has it been validated? And then people say no, and that's it. In fact, I remember several years ago, we were dealing with one of the private institutions of higher learning with medical guys, and it is just about 1 hour talk about being different. And I asked them, can we test blood sugar without blood? There was a total silence for a while. These are guys with their MDs, the medical doctors with PhDs and other things, and there was a total silence for a while because the word blood sugar itself means you need blood. And then after a while, one guy says, we never thought about it. And of course, 2 years later, Abbott introduced the patch where you can actually monitor the blood sugar continuously without actually pricking the person for a blood, So sometimes people don't stop. So one of the reasons people basically say is, hey, the biggest barrier for creativity is we don't pause and reflect and ask regularly, how might I or how might we? And that becomes a barrier. So these are some of the most common one, but the best one I like about it is basically says, one participant basically says from one of the cards, he say, we play not to lose. We don't play to win. And I thought that's interesting. It's a very nice metaphorical approach, playing to win and playing not to lose. So these are some of the things that I hear very often. But at the end of the day, it's a mindset. If you were to summarize the whole thing, you find that fixed mindset cannot be done. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. So what is your favorite creative thinking methodology? Do you have a favorite one?
Okay, now over a period of time, I go for SIPSI and I've collected a lot of all those research books and materials. And as a corporate trainer, I basically wanted to keep it simple. So the method that I basically adopted is basically I try, some people say 8 steps to creative thinking or 10 steps or 7 steps. I find it is a little complex for a lot of people. I basically go for just say as simple as no more than about 3. So one of the things I use the word is basically creative thinking starts with zoom in. That is gaining an insight about a problem. Hey, what is it all about? And then you go into the diverging mode where you go to ideation. And then, of course, we converge. So I skip to these 3 approaches, and then we do introduce play approach to explore more and more of these things. And initially, actually, I developed a model with 5 steps. I realized that 5 is too many, so now I go for the 3. So inside, where you zoom in, what is a real problem, and then you ideate, hey, how might we, and then, of course, you converge to say which one works for us best. And the other thing I do in methodology is, of course, I use certain tools. I encourage people, what if? And in fact, we always play a game. I say, think about your workplace problem and what if, and then what happens. And then all of a sudden, people come up with all kind of ideas. So that is one method I tried out. And then, of course, sometimes I say, let's go for a daydreaming or fanciful. The method I use is, it would be great if fill in the blank. Okay. So, for example, it would be great if I can check blood sugar without pricking the patient for blood in a healthcare environment. And it would be great if we basically do not have a customer service counter and yet we can serve the customer. So that kind of things. But the one that basically I find is the most useful, both in the zoom in gaining insight as well as converging, and is basically the scamper. I'm sure this is not new to a lot of people. They would have heard about it. And what happened is, this is a concept that basically Alex Osborne introduced as early as 1953. But of course, he used a listing of 8, and it's later on, 20 years later, and someone came and rearranged it, and they simply call it a scamper. Substitute, combine, adapt, modify, or minimize, and put to another use, eliminate, and reverse. That is one of the most common one. And I always tell people I end up introducing about 4 or 5 tools as a method of practicing creativity. I say, if one day you have to make a choice, consider scamper as one option, and you can't go wrong. Now, I ever tried about TRIZ, the TRIZ method, but it's too complex. And in a corporate environment, it doesn't work, because especially when I'm dealing with operational staff in frontline. And I want simple, I think Alex Osborne's the scamper basically works very well for us.
Yeah.
So that is one of the most useful tools that I use in the process of simply having it becoming more creative.
So this whole thing about testing blood without the blood sugar without blood, that challenge is to a certain extent a TRIZ challenge, which is called ideals final results. You want to find something that is amazingly simple, but taking some of the essential components out of the equation. So for people that were sending letters, to say, well, how can we send a message without using a stamp and paper and put that letter in the mailbox, etc. So then we found that maybe you could use a fax, or you can use the internet or something. So there are many things that have been improved by looking at the function instead of the objects. What do you want to achieve? And but it's so interesting that sometimes the creative ideas you come up with are so creative, and they use some of the principles of trees, even though you don't use trees as a concept. I wanted to ask you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree that trace is very comprehensive, and I think Scamper captures a number of elements with a simplistic approach. The other thing, I'm not sure whether I ever shared with you, I started out my career as a registered nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in intensive care unit. And one of the things that basically I felt very uncomfortable in the early days, when newborn basically comes in and they have jaundice, you have to check their blood regularly about the level of serum bilirubin, to check the bilirubin level so that intervention can be done. Each time I prick them, I felt uncomfortable. These are newborn, just 2 days, 2 days or 3 days old, and then here you get pricked. I always used to ask myself, can't this bilirubin be assessed without pricking? And of course, subsequently, when people start doing blood sugar level without blood, and people actually come up with all kind of ideas. So sometimes the frustration basically is a starting point, but nobody guide you, and nobody actually follow it up, and nobody come and ask you, hey, what is the one challenge that you face? And at that point of time, somebody say, hey, can I use this methodology of Scamper or TRICE in order to deal with that? And I think we are going to get far better results. Huh?
Yes.
So that's how basically I looked at it.
Thank you. So, what do you think? In what ways do you think we could improve the teaching of creative thinking?
Repeat again, sorry.
Yeah. In what ways do you think we could improve when we are teaching creative thinking? What other things could we do?
Okay. Actually, you find that when I was looking at it, basically, say, in fact, I was asked to do during the COVID time, and people get locked down, and no training all takes place in the Zoom. And I remember I was asked to do, hey, how can we make the teaching or learning still interactive in a Zoom environment with the engagement of audience, so that's how it is. So I basically, when start looking at what are the framework, because these are trainers who have been very well trained, and they want concepts which have been validated. And then all of a sudden I was looking and I realized as early as 1916, John Dewey actually introduced a concept of for academic environment, say learning by doing things. I thought that was interesting. And of course, subsequently, you find that in the 1990s, this guy basically come up with a 5E approach: engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. So by engaging people in the tooling, what do you think is creativity? In fact, I don't even define it. Hey, tell me a creativity. What is creativity? Say, one of this game I play, sometimes people say I'm very mean. I say, give me what is creativity, just one word. And ask people to basically use a platform, they type it in and flash on the screen, and people normally give one word, and then all of a sudden somebody gives 2 words or 3 words. And I'll stop on the screen and say, is that acceptable? Somebody say, but you say 1 word. And I say, then what about 2 words? Is it acceptable? And then all of a sudden somebody says, well, what do you say? Is it a rule or is it a guideline? I say, what do you think? And then all of a sudden, oh, we didn't ask. I say, yeah, this guy is willing to take it as a guideline. What if I give 2 words? And the moment we give that, and then all of a sudden people basically say, hey, the learning is completely takes a different direction. He says, there are times where we have to stop and ask ourselves. So I play this kind of game or activities in order to tell people, he say, hey, learning basically is about asking questions and engaging people. So the moment we engage, and that's how it is. Now, one of the greatest things that happened to me several years ago, I became an in-house trainer for one of the German auto manufacturers, and went through a certification to become a trainer. And that guy would train basically have only 2 slides. And the first slide is welcome and learning objective for the day. And the last slide is what we have learned today. In between is all about engaging people, exploring, and elaborating and evaluating, and so on. He was actually practicing the 5E in a very fun way without any kind of thing. So for us, teaching is basically where we allow people to explore and experiment with games, and that's the best way to teach and let people learn. In other words, we basically say create and better learning experiences with the 5E model. And of course, I like the Otto Schermer's Presencing Institute model as well, is where we co-create innovation. In fact, use the word, very interestingly, use a phrase, a trainer actually adopt the role of a midwife.
Mm-hmm.
And in other words, you are there to enable the delivery of the infant, but it's just that to enable. In fact, when I look at the word, he call it is basically version 4.0 in the educational evaluation metrics, and it says facilitator as a midwife. I thought that's interesting, but it's not very. It's similar to the 5E approach, where we actually allow people to explore and evaluate all by themselves. In other words, the trainer, the teacher, or the professor becomes an enabler of learning, and that's how I look at it. Instead of downloading and downwards is basically they take control of it. You just provide some direction, and that's what I do, and that's what I think would be a good approach when we are talking about actually teaching creative thinking. And if you're interested to improve it, I think involve people and play. And I think for me, play is that part of it.
Yeah. Well, people get a bit more of a relaxed mindset, and the interesting thing about play is that they are willing to take risks in play that they will not take in a different environment.
Yes. And once they've done it, then I bring them back to the real life. We say, what does it mean? Say, for example, in healthcare, what does it mean to the healthcare environment in this particular one? What can we apply it? And then people basically start connecting it, and they start actually exploring it on their own instead of we citing the research findings and then basically deal with that. So what I do, we always have participants say, is this been done before? Then I say, okay, you go to this QR code and look at these research articles, and if you want it, it is there. But you have done it yourself, and it's basically it works. So for me, the way we teach creative thinking can be improved is engaging people and using the play as a way of dealing with it. And for me, it's basically the Otto Schermer's, the educational metrics as well as the 5E approach works very well. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, getting people to experience and experiment is essential in order for them to be able to have their own reflection and their own understanding and making their own connections. So in other words, they are fully engaged in the learning process. So what do you think could be what is your greatest challenge as a professional in the field right now?
Okay, one of the frequently encountered problem for me is that I do come across key decision makers who do not value professional development as a top priority. That is one of the biggest challenge as a professional, and that's one of those things that I look at it. The second challenge I basically face is you find that individuals have their own learning needs, and then the group has their own learning needs, and organization have a slightly different learning needs, and combining them and integrating them and getting the best of all is one of the biggest challenge that I face basically in this as a professional in a learning and development field. So these are the two major kind of things that I deal with that. Now, the third one, you do come across people who basically comes into the things and they say, I know everything and there's nothing for me. My boss asked me to come here and I'm here and that's it, So that is another biggest challenge. So nowadays what I do with the play, and some people basically shift a little bit, it becomes less of a problem. And so I basically ask myself before I go in and say, hey, where is my audience there? Are they conscious of their incompetence? Of course, the word incompetence is a very harsh word. Are they conscious, unconscious of the incompetence? And then I just move them in the directions. And when I first come across this framework, people talk about it and I say, but who originated it? And I realized it's actually developed by a senior lecturer in a mission environment where he actually runs a theology college, and he realized his teachers or his trainers basically fall into these four. Some of the teachers are basically conscious of the incompetence. Some of them are unconscious of the incompetence, and they don't make any differences. Then you say, how could I, as a leader in this theology institute, move my people where they become to a level where they are unconscious, in others auto mode, where they are so competent but they are not conscious about it at all. So I thought that is one way of looking at it. So each time I go into a program, I basically try to visualize where are my participants likely to be, and what must I do to move them from this box to the other box. And then I use play and interactive as one way of dealing with that. So my challenge is invariably is many, but these are the three common challenges I face.
Thank you. So, what is the best model to create a strong professional relationship over time with clients? What have you found to be the best way to create that type of strong loyalty, if you want, or confidence in your message with clients?
Okay, one of the things that I do when I go to the client, basically the client says, hey, I want a workshop on emotional intelligence, and I just don't go and do it. I say, so why do you want a workshop on emotional intelligence? And then basically do what we call a need analysis, or basically asking questions. I don't want to use the word training need analysis because people become very cautious. I say, what is happening here? And then in the process of talking, I realize is basically what you need is not something I can offer. I tell the client, I say, look, I don't think I'm the right person. You probably would like to talk to someone with this background. So I don't sell it just because it's going to make money for me, but I sell it only when I say I can add value. So when sometimes there are clients, I say, this is not for me and I don't want to do it, and they are taken aback and says, you mean you want to let go? I say, yes, I let go. And few months later, they come back and says, hey, we look at it, can you handle this one? And then basically I say, why do you need it? So I try to identify the client's needs, and then I basically deal with that. Now, one of the things that we did for a Dutch shipping company, and we talk about it and we agreed. And then right from the beginning, I talk about it, how the being of this particular mindset helps them to live their values, the organizational values. They had about 7 values they are supposed to, it's listed on the board, it's listed in the website. But when we started off, nobody really remembered except the MD. But through play and repetitions, and eventually by the first tea break, everybody is able to remember that. And the client basically during the tea break says, John, I tell them, my HR tells them, but I don't think any of these guys remember. But now they all can remember what it means and how to live the values. And subsequently engage for us and more in other program, and he becomes like an advocate. He opened doors for me as well. So to me, the best way to create a solid professional relationship with the clients is meet their needs, and if you cannot meet their needs, just say, hey, sorry, this is not for me to do something, you may have to look at somewhere else. So that is one of the ways that I deal with that. And also, another way of looking at it is, of course, I ask the same question, how might I add value to this group of people? And when I finish the program, I tell them, I say, look, you can always come back and talk to us, either in the email or if necessary over a Zoom, we'll take a call. And but it is something that we leave the door open for them. And so this is a way that I deal with that. And so it's not a seminar one-off, but basically it's a long term. So there are some clients that I've been dealing with it for the last 10 years. Because of this approach, we basically goes in, and then that's how we do that. So meet the client's needs, not just your program, but if it doesn't serve the client, just say, sorry, I don't think this is a program for you. You may want to look at something else.
Yeah. Be very honest and have some a high level of integrity.
Yeah.
That's a very good way to look at it. So I don't have any more questions, but I wanted to ask you one extra thing, just in case you would like to share something else that is in your heart, or anything else about creative thinking or innovation that you have learned over the last couple of years. If there's anything, any type of wisdom, for instance, what is one small thing people can practice every day to become creative? What do you think?
You see, we did a program for a healthcare equipment manufacturers, and it is a 3-day program, and the MD was there throughout the period, and he asked, say, John, after this, what is one thing I can keep this going? I says, can you create a playful environment in the work environment in one corner of your office? He says, what do you suggest? I says, what do you think? You've been here with 3 days. Is there something that you have seen that you can actually live there? Then he says, maybe I should buy 2 buckets of Lego bricks and leave it in the pantry area for people to play. And I remember going back to the place about a couple of months later, and he told me, now they're not only playing, they're actually talking about work-related problems using these bricks to discuss the issues. And I thought, this is one thing that I probably should recommend clients to follow it up, do something different. And that's one of those things I realized. Play in the learning environment and play in the work environment. If they can come together, and that will be great. So one of the things I realized is to encourage people, especially clients who want to say, hey, how could I keep this going? I tell them, hey, introduce play, and that is one I realize is very powerful. The other thing I realized is to introduce interesting concept, which is basically is because of Grace. She introduced basically children's books in a workshop. We bring children's book. You probably would have heard these guys. I met them in CIPSI conference. I was so fascinated. Peter Renault and Paul Renault, they are twin brothers. They run children's books, and then they basically teach values. So this is one thing that I find it is interesting. In fact, I was reluctant to try it in a Singapore environment. I mean, client pays you a chunk of money, and then there you go and put children's books on the table for people to read. How would they respond? And then we did one for institutions, government-linked companies, and the senior director guy came early morning to do a simple opening, and he saw these books on the table, children's books, almost all the books were in the early days were Peter Renault and Paul Renault books. And he took and read few books, and then time to start, and then he shared his experiences. He's one of those, in Singapore, he's a scholar, was sent to MIT to do an MBA, and he was sharing, he says, when I went to MIT and do an MBA, I go with a lot of expectations. There I goes in, and that professor guy comes in early morning, first session, he says, next week when you come to this class, you must read at least one children's book. And he says, I was telling myself, I come all the way, probably my government paid about $250,000 for this program, and you are asking me to read a children's book. But then he says, but of course I didn't tell him that, I just thought of myself. And then I started reading it and realized the usefulness of that. So one of the things that I find is interesting to teach any concept, including creativity, is using children's book. And there's one book particularly, Sky Color. Peter Renault and Paul Renault wrote a beautiful book, Sky Color. And then at the end of the day, when they read the book and the people say, hey, what do you learn about this? And always people say, sky is not necessarily blue. And I thought, yeah, that's it. So blood sugar is not necessarily need to have blood. And so that is the takeaway. And so to me, the biggest insight for myself as a facilitator is using children's book, which are just about, most is about 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then on a sudden people get a lot of interesting ideas. So that is one thing that I find it is useful. And when people ask me among in the facilitators community, I say, hey, use bricks, Lego bricks, a Lego series play methodology elements, as well as children's book, and you'll find your learning environment becomes a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way to put it. Like, number one is this whole thing about triggers, using a children's book, and the other thing is the assumptions. That this is a very, very innovative way to generate a lot of ideas to use well. I want to look into what's Peter Reynolds' Sky Color.
It's an interesting book, or even like going places. Is another interesting book about teamwork and creativity together. And I also use sometime, the short video clips without violating copyright laws, like in the Olympic Games. You
Yes.
remember the last Olympic and the marathon. Everybody, of course, Sifan Hassan won the game, and then there's one person from Bhutan who basically came in last after several hours. Everybody thought that she will give up, but she didn't. So the commentator was saying that basically these things happened way back in several years ago, uh, where this guy from one of the African countries came and he keep on running and he came last, and people say, why you didn't give up? He said, well, my country didn't send me here to start the race. It sent me here to finish the race, and I'm here to finish the race. So sometimes I tell these kind of stories, and people say, what makes, huh? So is there something happened very recent, like Sifan Hassan and this lady, the runner from Bhutan, and people say, oh yeah, what makes her keep running despite that the race is over? She said, no, she's here to finish the race, not to start the race. So I use metaphors and stories as well.
Yes. No, that's very, very useful. Videos, metaphors, stories. Well, we have covered a lot of ground.
Thanks, Hector, to reach out to me. I really appreciate that, and for this opportunity. If you think it's something you need to edit or you need to cut off certain points or eliminate, go ahead. You are free to do a scamper on this interview.
Well, the fact is that this has been one of the most informative interviews, and that's because of your insightful way of thinking about every single thing. And your generosity. You've been very generous with us, and thank you so much. And we will be in touch, okay?
Okay, thank you very much, Hector, and send my best regards to your missus as well.
Yes, she asked me to send
you, both of you when you are in Singapore.
Yeah, we'll see you there.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.